Thanks Sid for coming over all the way from Delhi for this session. Let me start with one quote which I recently read from Alvin Toffler, and interestingly this was written pre-COVID. So illiterate of the 20th century is not who can not read and write, but those who cannot unlearn and relearn. And interestingly, as I said, it was written pre-COVID, and that COVID has proven that maybe many of these areas in a way true, right? And we have gone through a bit of hyper-learning phase. People and organization have changed. In fact, many large organization also has changed. The changes which can happen in years and decades happen in quarters or weeks, right? So that kind of hyper-learning, transformation kind of phase we have seen in the last few quarters. And also it is somewhere taught that it's not about your immediate competition, which is maybe coming from a technology disruption or a startup or your competition in your category, but it can come from anywhere. It can come from ecosystem, it can come from the environment, and the way right now we are saying it can be, geopolitical situation or any of those things, right? So organization need to get ready to transform, continuously learn, unlearn in this environment. And fortunately, we have Sid today, and Sid, has been seen this from a close quarter for 2.5 decades. He has worked for different kind of organizations. So he has spent time with Unilever as well as Vodafone. In fact, he has played a key role in launching many of the sort of large brand in those organizations. Then he has moved to Facebook as well as a startup in a gaming space, so games 24/7. So he's seen that kind of agility and tech kind of environment. And now he is in a Pearson. Maybe Sid will explain where exactly this fit in terms of sort of established company in a transformation or whatever way they are explaining, right? So Sid, thanks for coming over. Besides that, he has personally written 2 books, and especially one book I am really fond of is 52 Red Pills. Again, this was pre-COVID, and this is what the visionary does, right? So he has went through a hyper-learning journey, right? He used to pick up one topic every week and go into that topic that week, and he has done that journey over 52 weeks with his wife, and he has written that book. So again, very keen observer of consumer behavior, a lifelong learner, and good to have your thoughts on some of this area.
Thank you.
So as I sort of setting context, and one of the word is new normal. I was thinking of not to use that word, but this is one of the most abused word. So how do you see this consumer changing in a new normal kind of environment? What's your take on that?
Thank you, Tushar, first for the introduction and the kind words. I just wanted to check that everyone present in the room can hear us very, very clearly. Right at the back, if I can just get somebody to just wave out that you can hear us clearly. Fantastic, thank you. So I was listening in the last session, and with consumers, I think the interesting bit is some things are constant. So we hear about the new normal, we hear about the pace of digital transformation that's happening, but I think it's important for everyone in this room to realize that there is a certain truth in the statement which I heard from a very wise marketer. She sits on the boards of several companies and observes the consumer landscape over many, many decades. And she said this for everyone who understands a little bit of, there's a Hindi phrase to it, that consumer behavior is like a kutte ki dum. So it kind of, you try and roll it up, it kind of comes back to a certain position that it was earlier. So with that little bit of, a preamble, if I may, there are a couple of things which have changed dramatically because of the pandemic, accelerating consumer transformation, changing some ways in which people used to view the world. And I think from my vantage point, having worked at organizations which have built brands over decades, so you spoke about Unilever and Vodafone, where I was privileged to build businesses and brands, but also organizations that were built on this side of the millennium, Facebook, Games 24/7, where brands were built in a much shorter period of time and trust was established in a much shorter period of time. In the pandemic, I think 3 things have come to the fore. The first is, and I think people in the audience will resonate to this first point, which is that there is an increased emphasis on health and wellness. And health and wellness, don't think of it as health and wellness only in categories like medicine or preventive health, etc. Does your brand care for you to give you the best possible experience in an increasingly fragile world? So that's the first thing, which is the overall health and wellness that we see. The second bit is that digital transformation has democratized digital experiences. So you can have a child who can learn coding in an absolutely online environment at year 6 or year 7. But you can also have a 74-year-old person who's never actually shopped for grocery online, has preferred the fresh touch and feel of going to the bazaar and getting grocery, but now it's comfortable, a little bit more comfortable, ordering through one of the grocery portals. So what the last 2 years of forced lockdowns and the forced safety situations have done is that we've got democratized digital experiences. And the third thing, I won't call it the new normal, but it's the evolving normal, as it were. Given the intense amount of financial shakedown that's happening globally, in India, we still feel less of a pinch, but if you look at global markets across, and you spoke about the macro volatility due to the wars that are happening, etc., there will be consumers who will ask brands for increased value. They will make highly discretionary choices, and so brands will have to offer more value. They can't sit on their laurels in the past. You can't sit on your laurels even more now in the so-called evolving new normal.
And I guess to couple with that, there is, I think, width and depth of digital penetration has also grown quite a bit, right? In terms of the type of behavior and a maturity which has happened has also grown,
yes.
Which is triggering some of this behavior during this COVID phase.
Yes.
If you look at, and again, I'm just going back to sort of previous era kind of thing, the thinking has typically been very, very linear, right? And the way you think about a value chain, supply chain, even the marketing framework, which is IDA kind of thing, it's a very, very sequential way of thinking. And I guess digital is, in a way, trying to change or eclipsing some of this thinking in a newer way. It's becoming a more ecosystem play, it's becoming more of a network kind of thinking, where you need to look at multiple dimensions. And especially, I think technology is playing
absolutely
very, very integral role in terms of driving some of these changes. So how do you see the business adopting to this? How do you see the business changing in this?
So from a business landscape, and I was floating around outside in the lobby area, and I saw a lot of young marketeers, and I'm sure a lot of the marketeers here would have kind of started your journeys over the last couple of years. Three things might be interesting. You used to read about IDA, which was your classic awareness phase leading to action in a certain linear way, in which you said, well, the IDA model, it's no longer linear, it's a noodle, right? So consumers can make choices in nanoseconds, actually, or more interestingly, they can be recommended brands that they have never heard of, make those choices because the barriers of entry or the barriers to payment or the barriers to return the brand if the brand does not serve that proposition has completely gone down. So the classic curve has become a noodle. And Tushar, I can bet that in all of the sessions today at the IMI Digital Conference, we'll probably have some of the speakers mentioning ChatGPT. Because we know, everyone in the room knows that this was not even a product that was in consumer consciousness before the month of December. And we're still, in early December. So the IDA model has completely got disrupted by technology. So that's point number one. Point number two, and this I learned from a couple of startup stints that I did, is the role of consumer psychology. And for everyone who's an aspiring marketer here, an aspiring business builder here, the role of psychology in making sure that you're able to understand and guide your consumers. It's easy or difficult to acquire depending upon which industry you are in. But I think the golden game that I learned was about retention in an increasingly undifferentiated world where consumers can identify or discover a brand very easily, but also move on to the next big thing very easily. So how do you retain people? And I think one of the things that I will suggest to everyone in the audience is to look at picking up a little bit of a basic understanding of psychology and the role of nudges in that. for consumer retention. So that's point number 2, which is relevant for business. And the third thing, and we were talking about it in the speakers lounge, is that no brand or no organization in today's world sits in some kind of a vacuum today. So you spoke about just like you could be disrupted from anywhere, you could also form partnerships and alliances from anywhere. So do think about your brands or you needing to have friends or partners or a partnership ecosystem. I've experienced that when I was leading marketing for Vodafone. I've experienced that when I was at Facebook. You can't really stay in a vacuum. So again, for all the young marketeers there, in your first 5-10 years of your career, partnership with like-minded partners is a great strategy for you to put up a competitive moat and to give delightful digital experiences to your consumers.
Yeah, and interesting you mentioned about ChatGPT, and I would like to extend what you just mentioned on the noodle, right? In some of these category and business, it's becoming more like a flywheel and not just noodle, right? And consumer can enter from any point.
Yes.
And then those category drive significant amount of advocacy to keep scaling up basically those flywheel, right? And many of the newer age businesses seen that kind of impact.
Absolutely.
Is there any learning you see for the traditional business in those areas?
So I think this was an interesting debate about digital businesses via traditional businesses, and I would argue that today all businesses have to be digital businesses. And this is not only from a point of view of customer acquisition or making sure that you are able to serve a certain experience. It's about the entire value chain, right from how you procure to how you provide customer service to how you make sure that you are able to get your lifetime value, LTV, from a consumer using the entire value chain. We see that similar thing playing out at Pearson, for example, which is disrupting itself to be more relevant to the 21st century learner. So I think it's an interesting time for us to be alive as business builders and as marketers.
Interesting. And so many of the people are today's marketer, they are calling it augmented marketing era, right? The era of augmented marketer. Because they are getting aided by, in a way, AI, data, multiple technologies front to, help make them decision. So what's your take on that? Again, how do you see in terms of next few years?
So the thing about marketers is, Tushar, that we often hear there's a model that I'm sure some of the marketers here in the room would have read, that you have to become a Da Vinci CMO, which means you have to have certain attributes. Then you'll hear the fact that you have to be a T-shaped marketer, which means that you have to have a spike in a certain area while knowing the other aspects of marketing. Here's my very simple analogy that I'd like to give. Just like when you go to a gym and you do, let's say, dumbbells, you're exercising both your hands. So think of yourself as a modern day marketer needing to have both your right hand and your left hand with muscles. Your left hand could be data and your ability to understand and decode data, and your right hand, on the other hand, could be creativity. And so therefore, understanding how do you harness data and creativity. But at the heart of it, the soul of it, if you think about the construct of the body, the heart of it will still be understanding consumer insights. Because if you don't understand the context of your consumer, who your consumer is, as marketers, we all tend to have this ability to hop on to the latest new thing. How can I kind of, get on to the next big shiny toy? And I would argue that spend a lot of time in terms of building these two muscles between data and creativity, but at the heart of it will be consumer insight. After you've understood this, sure, you can do your experiments in terms of does it make sense for me to explore a little bit of metaverse? For example, when I was in gaming, metaverse was not a new concept. Gaming has been doing metaverse for the last 10 years, where people have existed in digital avatars and played with digital cohorts across the world with people they might not physically know. But I think you have to find out who your target audience is and make sure that your experiences are appealing to that target audience for you to build consumer engagement. I'll give you a small little story. This morning, I was running in the gym on a treadmill which had a virtual mountain run. So I was possibly running, somewhere else in the world while being in Bandra, Mumbai. Now, it might be interesting for me in the next few quarters to figure out if I can run with my friend who's not even in the country in a digital avatar, wearing the brands that we like, let's say a Nike, bought by digital currency, and indeed if we break our personal best on that run, could we be rewarded by brands that we really love? So that is an example of how brands today or CMOs in the 21st century can engage their audience as well as tap into new pools of revenue.
Interesting. And then if I were to get a bit in more detail, and I were to put, so one axis is suppose like a tech on a marketing side, other is the entire human touch on that. Where do you like to be in that kind of spectrum? Is it more on the automation side, more on the being human side? How do you drive those balances?
The more we go on the automation side, I fear that marketeers and brands will become more and more undifferentiated. And so therefore, to me, in my personal opinion, the human insight or the human touch or understanding of consumers is core. You have to differentiate yourself by superior understanding of the consumer and then offer the most seamless digital experience for your consumers, the best possible payment options, for example, and that kind of makes it friction free. The core understanding which will lead you to the right nudge, and all of us here in this room who've ever worn an Apple Watch will know what I'm talking about. When I say that, your Apple Watch at 10 o'clock at night tells you just this little bit left to close your ring, right? That's an example of a nudge. That's an example of a brand which is understood today, and I was speaking about health and wellness. I was talking about how brands should have some value that they offer beyond the functional value, and that's an example of a brand which is offering you that, nudging you at a point of time which is highly relevant for you, and allowing you to accomplish a task that you might have set out at the beginning of the day.
So what I hear you say is basically starting point still continue to remain the consumer.
Yes.
Empathy and being a human is a priority, a layer on top of that, and then you sort of build something which is more data and tech enabled.
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
maybe order.
But that empathy and human layer is possibly your differentiating factor, is possibly your competitive advantage.
And often there is a notion that data and creativity are also two different spectrums. So how does one balance?
And that's exactly why my analogy holds, which is that if you're going to a gym and exercising your left hand only, great, you'll build your biceps in your left hand. But then is that really the best body that you want? And so therefore your data and your creativity muscles have to be equally built. And that's when you are, whether you choose to call it an augmented marketeer or whether you choose to call it the modern marketeer in the 21st century.
Maybe let me move to the last question, and we'll get
Sure,
into a bit
sure.
of detail here. And your company is also in a business of writing textbooks, so this might be a question. So if you have to rewrite marketing textbook today, what are the three things you will include and what are the three things you will exclude?
So, when we were talking about this just outside this room and we were playing with this question of how would you rewrite the marketing textbook, I think the first little anecdote that I would like to share with the audience is that the original textbook of marketing, which is Kotler, and I'm assuming more than half the audience or indeed the full audience might have heard of Kotler and the rules of marketing, is actually a Pearson author. Having said that little and shared that little bit of trivia, I think the way that I would see the modern day marketing textbook, the first thing that I would say is people have moved beyond products and people are looking towards products with some associated values. I love this story that I heard when I was a young brand manager of Phil Knight describing Nike. And you can have brand Bibles and you can have books to describe brands and large pothas, etc. But the way he described Nike was, imagine if you're running at 5 o'clock in the morning and it has started raining, it's drizzling, so it's cold and dark and it's raining, so it's not a great experience, but you're still running. And you see that small little lamp street light, and under that street light is somebody who's cheering you on, and Phil Knight says that that's Nike. So that's, to me, that's one of the values of a brand that has made it my personal favorite, but that also elevates a product into something greater. I would argue that in today's very volatile, very changing, very fragile world, consumers will increasingly look towards brands which offer great products, but also great values. Some companies choose to call it purpose, I'm calling it values. The second thing that I would like to talk about in the newly written marketing textbook is the role of omnichannel. So great, you can build all the brands that you want in the digital domain, but at the end of the day, people or human beings are emotional creatures. And so therefore, there needs to be an element where they can touch, they can experience, they can speak to somebody, they can buy your brand in ways which are different from the digital experience. And hence, the role of omnichannel and the role of phygital is something that I would definitely like to talk about. The third thing is, in the new marketing textbook, I think that, and I find this very fascinating. Earlier, people talked about competition and they were looking at category competition. And Tushar, you and I were talking about this. You can now be disrupted from anywhere. In fact, ChatGPT that we were talking about is suddenly being seen as a rival to search giants in such a short period of time. I spoke about Apple Watch in a bit. A couple of years ago, my friends and I were in a little bit of a space race to acquire the next good luxury Swiss brand of watch. And none of us are wearing any luxury watches any longer, because suddenly the watch category has got disrupted by someone who is not even in watches, because the consumer need has changed. It's not about the functionality of your time, which you can see in your mobile phone. It's now about the data that you get, which are about your health and associated statistics. So you can be disrupted from anywhere. So it's not only your competition. In terms of three things that the modern day textbook that it should definitely have, and I kind of noted it down when you were talking about it. The first is social commerce. And I think in the previous session, the speakers were talking about influencers. I have a very strong point of view on choosing the right influencer because, and I think there was a conversation about saying that who is authentic. I'll go one step beyond. Who really can represent the core value of the brand? So I think social commerce is one big piece that I would like to include in the marketing textbook. I think the second thing, which is a superpower which marketeers and business builders in today's 21st century digital village must have, is effective communication. I think it's a very cluttered world. A lot of brands use celebrities, and that's great. But I think effective communication boils down to really understanding if you have got your consumer insight right. And there's a very useful framework that I learned in my early days in marketing, which was ABCD, which was, is your brand grabbing attention? Is the communication that you are doing intrinsically branded? Like if you remove Coca-Cola from the bottle will still be the iconic Coca-Cola glass. So B. C, communication. Is there one single point of communication that the brand is driving? So that's C. And D is differentiated. Do you have a unique point of view? And that unique point of view might not arise from functional superiority. It could also arise from an emotion that you evoke in your audience. So A, B, C, D. So if you've got that right, you possibly have a shot at effective communication. And the last piece that I would definitely like a modern day textbook to have is the understanding of how do you play it across the entire channel beyond the communication. Communication is just one part of it. Customer experience, after sales service, how do you retain consumers for years?